The next episode of Nerd, Flicks, and Chill will start in
3, 2, 1, 0.
Hey everybody, this is Nick,
This is Kari.
and we are Nerd, Flicks, and Chill. And today we are reviewing and recapping Game of Thrones Season 6, Episode 9, The Battle of the Bastards.
Also known as Bob, I've heard.
Yes. Yes.
It just makes me laugh. I like that better. I like Bob better than Bastards.
Bob.
Yeah.
All right, so this is it, the penultimate episode. As per Game of Thrones history, Episode 9s have always been a lot of spectacle. It's always been the biggest, most critical episode of the entire season. And I really feel like they threw the kitchen sink at us in this one.
Yeah, and then some. The kitchen sink and the bathroom sink, and then the spare sink that might be in the garage. I grew up, we had a sink in the garage too. And then one down in the basement. They threw all of them at us.
Before we get into the recap, just to kind of touch on our preview and predictions episode, Kari, you were not super optimistic about this episode. And I'm curious to know, after the fact, did your feelings change at all?
They did. I saw what I needed to see. I got the rage, I got the fury, I got the emotion out of Jon Snow that I was hoping to see. He evolved from a bowl of plain oatmeal into a fully fledged tasty meal, and I ate it up. It was great. Now that doesn't mean that I don't think the episode had its faults. I don't think it was perfect by any means. There's a couple little nitpicky things that I have to say, but overall, I thought this episode was stellar.
Yeah, my thoughts on this episode can be summed up in 2 words. Game-changing. I think this is a game-changing episode of television, not just for the series, but I'm talking about for television as a storytelling medium. I think that for years now, we've kind of had this idea emerging that television was starting to surpass film in terms of quality storytelling.
Yeah.
And I think this particular episode of this particular show might have just tipped the balance and redefined the way that we watch television moving forward. Because I can't think of an hour of TV that has ever been more ambitious than this.
That's an excellent point. This was cinematic in every sense of the word, even more so than a lot of movies that have come out. This was on the scale of Braveheart. This was on the scale of 300. This was on the scale of Lord of the Rings. It was a huge undertaking, and I think they executed it perfectly as far as the battles go.
I think sometimes when we watch a TV show or a film or anytime we consume any kind of art, I think sometimes as an audience we can become a little bit too high on our horse, to use that analogy.
Mm-hmm.
And when I watched this episode and then watching some of the stuff that HBO has put out with regards to the the anatomy of a scene video that they did where they talk about how they shot the Battle of the Bastards and stuff like that, you get the feeling that so much effort, so much care, so much love went into making this episode of television that it's almost humbling for you as an audience member to actually see it, because they did it the hard way and they did it because they wanted to make it cool for the audience. And I think that is why we do this podcast. That's why you and I in particular call ourselves movie nerds, right? For the very reason that we do it is what we saw on display in that episode last night.
Well, they took just as much care into this one episode that some movies do for an entire movie. I mean, it took them over 20 days to film this one, just the battle parts, just this one episode. And there are entire movies that are filmed in, that sequence of time. So, this was massive. And like you said, I don't think you could put it any better when you said that it was game changing. It really is. It set that bar really high from now on.
Yeah, and I think this is going to be kind of a pivotal moment in the TV landscape. I think that once you've shown that this can be done, it changes everything. And I think for me personally, I had very high expectations of this episode. This is something that I have been wanting for a long time. I've been wanting to see the Starks reclaim Winterfell. I've been wanting to see Jon face off with Ramsay ever since, I read the pink letter in the books. This was what I wanted to see. This was the episode that I've been waiting for. And for me personally, it exceeded all of my expectations. And the reason why it exceeded my expectations is because I saw things that I did not expect. We can talk about the plot and how the battle itself had a lot of very predictable elements in it. And that's true, it did. But it showed me enough in the uniqueness of its story and the evolution of the battle that it exceeded every expectation I had for it. So I'm a big advocate for this episode. I think it's one of my favorites of the entire series. I don't want to necessarily rank it among the others just yet. I do have some minor criticisms of it, but I think in terms of sheer spectacle, this is as good as it gets.
I'm right there with you. So let's get into the nitty gritty. Let's get into the actual episode because we both just said that we have some criticism. So we're not completely fangirling out on it. But let's go ahead and dive in and let's start with Marine.
Yeah, and the very opening shot that we get of the trebuchet being loaded and launched towards the Great Pyramid, this episode starts immediately with this incredible tracking shot over the landscape of the battle. I mean, this stuff looked magnificent.
It did. I will say, though, my first criticism comes with this first scene. Not with that tracking shot. That tracking shot was awesome, and I loved that it was echoed later on in the episode with a tracking shot with one of Ramsay's arrows going down into the troops, which I thought was a really nice touch. However, after we get that awesome tracking shot from the trebuchet, we see Dany standing on the balcony of the pyramid. And my big problem was that the last episode, the battle started, it looks like it started at night. So were they attacking it all night long? And she's standing on, and she arrived, and then she's been standing out there all the way into the next day? Like, why didn't they take action sooner?
I think we're led to believe that there's actually a passage of time that takes place because Dany's also wearing a completely different outfit. So it almost looks like she arrived back in Marine, and we don't know what the situation on the ground is. We don't know if the Unsullied is out there fighting off the Harpies or if this is just a naval siege that's taking place and they're just kind of trying to react. So we don't really know what those elements are, but it is a little bit awkward, that weird discontinuity between where we left Dany last episode and where we pick her up here.
Well, yeah, it's not just the passage of time thinking, okay, so you're just letting them sack the city, it looks like, and you're just kind of hanging out on the balcony. I would think as soon as you arrive, it's like, okay, let's get down to business. So we're led to believe that there's at least a few hours of time because it was either in the middle of the night or very early in the morning when they started attacking. But when we arrive in this episode, it's daylight. It looks really bright, so it's fairly later in the day, I'm guessing. And it looks like at this point, Tyrion is just now explaining kind of what's happening or what's been going on. And that just seemed kind of strange to me, that why would your city is under attack? Why would you wait hours and hours and hours for this to happen? So anyway, that's my first nitpicky criticism.
I actually think the answer to that also is that because the script called for it in the last episode, and then they had Miguel Sapochnik directing this one, and
yeah,
I mean, I don't know that there's any good answer for it. It's definitely kind of an awkward bit of discontinuity, but
I mean, that didn't ruin it for me, but I just thought it was kind of strange. Anyway,
so Tyrion explains himself explains what's going on. Dany wants to go full Mad King, burn all the ships, do all that.
Yeah.
Tyrion kind of offers a slightly different way, and that takes us to this next scene where she is negotiating with the Masters terms of surrender.
I do want to back up just a second, though. While she was mentioning what she was wanting to do, Tyrion went into a very detailed explanation of wildfire and different placements of wildfire within King's Landing.
Yeah, not, and this is one of my criticisms of this episode, actually. I could have done without that entire scene. For me, having Jaime tell Tyrion about the wildfire plot from the Mad King kind of mitigates the bathtub scene that Jaime and Brienne had a couple seasons ago,
Mm-hmm.
because you got the sense from that scene that it was like this very intimate, very personal thing that Jaime was revealing, and having it revealed to Tyrion kind of diminishes it a little bit, and it's almost like it was done to foreshadow. But at the same time, the show didn't need it. I think foreshadowing is great when you can go and hunt for it and you can find little moments of foreshadowing, but there becomes a point of beating the audience over the head with it.
I think it was set up for the audience, for us, to remind us or to foreshadow what could be happening in the next episode.
Yeah, I just didn't feel it was necessary.
Well, for those of us like you and I that are really into every episode and we've been following all of these, I don't think it's something that we need to be told again, but possibly for a more casual viewer who might not be following all these puzzle pieces as closely as we are. You know what I mean? They might need that extra little reminder.
Sure.
Speaking of which, it was kind of this is a perfect segue. It was kind of brought up to our attention just recently that some of the things that Nick and I talk about, obviously we are huge nerds for Game of Thrones, and we have really looked at this and studied it and each of the episodes for a while and repeatedly. We don't just watch the episodes just one time and move on. I usually watch them 2 to 3 times a piece, if not more. So sometimes some of the things that we mention, they might go over somebody's head if you are a more of a casual viewer. And there is nothing wrong with that. So if there's something that we say that you don't understand, like for example, Nick, I believe you had a conversation with somebody and they had no idea what we were talking about when we mentioned the Reigns of Castamere. So if there's something that we mentioned and there's like, well, what are they talking about? Send us a message on Facebook or send us a tweet on Twitter. If there's anybody that's interested, I think we will welcome you with open arms and bring you into our nerdy circle.
Yeah, I kind of forget sometimes that people don't obsess over this the way that we do.
No, and
But
even so, I mean, you know a lot more than I do, so even I question things with you. It's like, oh, is that a book thing? Or, can you explain that to me a little bit more? But even now, I find that I'm watching it on a completely different level than what I used to. So I get it because I've been there. It took me probably into maybe halfway into the second season before I really started to understand who some of the people's names were. And then they would just keep throwing out new characters and who is that? What is this? I don't understand. So, yeah, I get it. I've been there. So if you have questions, let us know.
so as I was saying, we do have that shot of the masters negotiating with Dany and Tyrion. And one of the things that jumped out right away about this scene is that establishing shot of the masters on the left-hand side, where you've got Daenerys and her gang on the right-hand side,
Mm-hmm.
with this really great bit of architecture behind them, clouds and sun. This is just such a beautifully framed shot. I mean, I'm so impressed with Sapochnik's work as a director, but also the DPs that work on Game of Thrones. I mean, they are just phenomenal, and I love that shot so much.
Yeah, the cinematography is fantastic. You can see the battle continuing to happen behind them, and I love the writing for this scene.
So did I. There's a little bit of a misunderstanding about terms of surrender. the masters seem to think that Danny's just gonna be like, oh, okay, I give up, kill
Yeah.
my dragons. That's not what she has planned for them.
No, and now in our last episode, in our preview episode for this one, now that brief little synopsis that we heard or that we found for this episode that was submitted to the Emmys, now it makes sense.
Sure does.
Yes.
One of the things that I love about this scene is as Daenerys is talking to the slavers, there's that shot of one of the slavers, the name I can't remember, totally escapes me, but in the background, far off in the distance, you get Drogon flying. He almost looks like a bird. He's so far away.
Yeah, it took
And
me a
then
couple
before you know it,
times. When I first saw that, I thought maybe that was just like a random like banner or something that was falling, but it didn't make any sense because where was it coming from? The first time I saw it, the second time I watched it, it was like, oh, there it is, right there. You can see him. So cool.
and then of course he lands on top of the building that's next to them. I'm not exactly sure what that building is, just looks like a ruin. And then when Drogon gets off of that ruin, he lands next to Dany, and I think this is one of the coolest shots ever in Game of Thrones. Dany standing next to Drogon's head.
Yeah.
So awesome. It looks unbelievable.
The dragons in this episode, they have never looked better than they did in this episode. Everything with them, their animation, the lighting, the tracking of them, her getting on Drogon, her flying on Drogon, just the combination of the live action and the CG with the dragons has never looked so good. So good.
Yeah, I mean, this stuff looks fantastic. And, she's getting better about riding Drogon around. She hops on, goes for a ride, kind of surveys the landscape. She notices that she's got her two other dragons that have now popped out of the whatever the thing was that they were caged up in. I can't remember the name of it right now. And then all of a sudden, we now have triple dragon action.
Yeah, amazing. And I love the fact that they were down in there the whole time. They broke out freely themselves. They could have gotten out any time that they wanted. They were just waiting on
Yeah,
Dany to come
they were
back.
waiting for the barbecue.
Yeah, they weren't going to leave until she came back and told them they could.
And
Amazing.
here's the thing that I really love about this in particular. And since most of this happens off book, I'm not going to talk about the books much, but I do want to make a one comparison here. In the show and in the books as well, you get the sense that this universe exists within two worlds. A world where magic is coming back to the world, like kind of what we're seeing play out with, the story that we've been watching over 6 seasons, but also this kind of mystical world that once existed. A world with, Targaryens and hundreds of dragons and all this other magical, whimsical stuff. This scene of Dany and her 3 dragons over Meereen is the first time that this feels like a throwback in and of itself to a time that existed much earlier in this universe. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But then at the same time, you have that juxtapositioned with earlier in this season, we basically saw the dying out of the children of the forest. And then also later on in this episode, we see One be killed, which we're led to believe that he's the last of the giants. So you're having the rebirth of this mysticalness of that universe, but then at the same time, you're seeing some of it die out as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We also see some harpies trying to do some damage at the city gates. That's pretty short-lived, though, because they hear that rolling thunder of Dothraki horses rolling up on them, led by Dario, who takes somebody's head off. Yeah, you see Dario ride in, swinging that big scythe-looking weapon. I can't remember the name of that either. Takes the dude's head right off. And you assume that the Dothraki are going to pretty much have an easy time with whatever Sons of the Harpy are in there. All I know is if I'm one of the Sons of the Harpy, I'm like taking my mask off and just like throwing it in the bushes or something.
Yeah, and then we have Grey Worm and Tyrion and Missandei up there completing their negotiations with the masters, telling them, okay, well, one of you is going to have to die.
Yeah, and you know what? Just before that, too, we get to see Dany and her dragons burn a boat. And
Yeah,
this
they
is
just the
just
one, just the one.
and holy shit. I mean, this shot of the dragons, all three of them flying over all the ships that are out there in the bay.
Yeah.
This is just tremendous. It reminded me of the shot in The Force Awakens where you're following the X-wing down as it's like shooting all the different TIE fighters.
Yeah, I like that comparison. That's really good. But yeah,
It reminded me of that. It was awesome.
so they go and they just destroy the one ship because then we find out that she's going to keep all of the ships, which I was hoping. I'm thinking it'd be really silly to destroy all of those ships when she's needing a whole bunch of ships. So they only did the one just to show what we could do. And
Yeah,
then we join back up with Tyrion and Grey Worm and Missandei.
sometimes you need a scalpel and not a hammer. And I
That's right.
think Danny was recommending the hammer and Tyrion recommended the scalpel.
Yeah. That's why I like the two of them together. They mesh very well together. They balance each other very well. Because she's just wanting to go in, not even just a hammer, but like a battering ram. She's just wanting to go in there, and he's like, oh, let's have a little bit more finesse.
And this is the
So
first time that we see her using Drogon as a weapon and not as like a Coast Guard helicopter.
no, he's been used as a weapon before.
Not with her on his back.
Well, no, they were used as weapons behind her when they were in the what's the House of the Undying.
Undying. Yeah, they were like babies then though. This is
Right,
like
but she was
full
using them as a
on.
weapon.
This is full on Danny Dragon Queen, the likes of which we've never seen on the show.
Okay, the dragons were bigger, but she used them as a weapon before.
But not riding them.
No.
She's only ever rode off on Drogon as like, get me out of here, or
Right.
I need to get back home.
That's right. He was her
Dragon
Uber ride. Yes.
Yeah.
But yes.
So yeah, and then we get the deal, which basically is no deal at all. Grey Worm kills two of the slavers, keeps the one guy alive, so he can tell everybody the story of what happened when Danny came to Meereen. Grey Worm, pretty swift in his throat slashing, by the way.
Oh, and I love the fact that he, straightens out his shirt afterwards, or his little vest. He's got to look good after he just killed those two guys.
I do love the way Tyrion just kind of gives that slaver just kind of a little pat on the shoulder. And then they all just kind of walk away. It's very cool. Total power move.
Yeah. Very, very
like
good.
do that in one of your work meetings.
Okay.
Just like decimate somebody with words and then get up, pat them on the shoulder, and remember what happened the last time Kari came to this meeting.
That's right. So we find out that the Greyjoys have arrived.
Yeah, we do.
And there's a little bit of banter that goes on back and forth.
Oh, it's not
Tyrion,
just banter.
No, it's not.
Tyrion talking to Theon for the first time since Winterfell, when Theon was making some jokes about his height. Tyrion has remembered. But basically, we get to the idea that this is the Greyjoy alliance that they are proposing. They want to give Dany ships. In return, the Greyjoys get the Iron Islands. And there's a whole lot of flirty, sexy going on here between Yara and the Dragon Queen, huh?
There is, and even Tyrion is kind of watching it, and I think at one point he kind of rolls his eyes a little bit and was like, okay, this is feeling a little awkward. I enjoyed it. I thought it was great, and I want to see more of them together. And I thought it was really kind of sweet, the moment where Yara, she holds out her hand, and Dany's like, I don't know what to do. What is this? And she has to look at a Tyrion, and he's like, yeah, go ahead, put out your hand. And they do the little shake. But the thing is that the Greyjoys and the Iron Islands are going to have to completely change their way of life. I don't know how that's going to go down.
I don't know. But really, if you're Yara, what choice do you have?
Exactly.
If you don't make this deal, you're screwed, and you're
Yeah.
just going to end up being killed by Euron. I think that's kind of the interesting question that this whole circumstance leaves me with, because I almost feel like this plot pigeonholes Euron's character a little bit, because he's stuck on the Iron Islands trying to build 1,000 ships that we might not even need now. So I'm just kind of curious what direction this goes in. I think that was the biggest question that I had from this particular moment with Yara and Daenerys.
Well, yeah, because even Danny brought up a good point. She's like, well, if he's going to come, with 1,000 ships, why don't I just wait for him? But yeah, so what does that mean now? So he's just there building away for what? So I have a feeling we're going to see Danny taking off for Westeros sometime soon, and they make it across. Probably not going to head straight for the Iron Islands, so she might. Who knows where she's going to land over in Westeros? So she might head over to Westeros, and Euron's not going to have any idea that any of this is happening, and he's still trying to build his ships. I don't know what's going to happen with him.
Maybe I'm not sure. I'm not sure what's going to happen here, because it definitely seems like it kind of undercuts Euron's purpose a little bit. So,
Yeah.
which I assume means that he's going to have a purpose that's completely different than what we are expecting. I'm sure there's some move that he's going to pull that's going to maybe propel him into the vacuum that's been created for villains in this series after this episode.
Yeah, because we're going to be in need of another really good down and dirty villain.
Any other thoughts on Marine in this episode before we get to the main event?
No, let's just jump right on into it. Let's head north.
All right, so we have the parlay that takes place between Jon and Davos and Tormund and Sansa and Lyanna Mormont, and we also have on the other side Ramsay and his gang. I think Karstark and Small John Umber, and they go to basically treat with one another to try to avoid battle. But we all know there's going to be a battle. We all know that this is just them sizing each other up, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, because later on in the episode, Tormund asks Jon, did you really think he was going to take you up and fight you one on one? And just says, no, I was just trying to make him mad. He was just trying to egg
Yes.
him on.
Yeah, so this is just everybody kind of trying to test everybody.
Yeah.
It seems like here in this scene that Sansa feels like she has more of an idea of what's going on here.
Yeah.
There's also the direwolf head that gets thrown on the ground as proof that they have Rickon, and that made me wonder, how long has that guy been carrying a dead wolf's head around?
And is it just me, or does it seem like it got even smaller? I know people were questioning the size of the direwolf head when it was first presented, but now that they, threw it on the ground for whatever reason, and I'm sure it's probably the same prop, but I don't know, maybe just because it's now been we see it kind of next to the size of a horse or something, it seemed even smaller to me. But anyway.
Well, maybe just, starting to decompose after
Yeah,
that guy's been
probably.
carrying it around for a couple months now.
Ugh. Then it was in fairly good shape, if that's the case.
This whole parlay ends with Sansa riding off after she tells Ramsay Bolton, sleep well because you're going to die tomorrow.
Yeah.
And of course, Ramsay does his kind of chest thumping intimidation thing. My dogs are hungry, haven't fed them in a week. That'll come back to haunt him a little bit later.
Mm.
But essentially, this whole thing is just a standoff. It's just everybody sizing each other up. But when we get back to camp, we get a little bit more stuff going down. So we have Jon talking strategy with Davos and Tormund, and they have a strategy. They have a plan. And their plan is to get everybody to charge at them.
Well, they even talk about we're going to dig trenches so they can't, get us from the sides. They laid out this whole plan, and it doesn't happen.
Well, this is true. But they did have an entire plan that they were going to use, and it actually ends up being the same plan that Ramsay has. The two sides had pretty much the same plan.
Yep.
What I like about this scene, this war council that we see, is you get the sense that the wildlings do not know military strategy at all.
Right.
Because Tormund is just sitting there with a blank stare on his face when he's talking about a pincer move and double envelopment. And Jon's like, the sides. They can't get us from the sides. And Tormund just, good.
So the guys leave, and we have just Sansa and Jon left in the room. And Sansa's kind of upset that nobody has asked her what to do. And I kind of got upset with her because she's got this ace in her pocket, but she's not telling anybody. Even when she has a moment to try and tell them, she doesn't.
Were you like yelling at the screen, tell him, tell him, tell him?
Yes, there were a couple times during this episode that I was yelling at the screen, and that was one of them. And, you know, why doesn't anybody ask me? I know him. And then Jon says, okay, then what do we do? And she says, well, I don't know. It was so frustrating, but she does. She has this ace in her pocket, and she doesn't tell anybody about it. And I don't know why she doesn't tell. Why are you holding on to this information? I have no idea. I have no idea why she lied about meeting with Littlefinger when they were discussing things at the wall. I have no idea why she never mentioned that she sent a letter to ask for the troops. I have no idea why she's holding on to the information that they're on their way. I have no idea why. But she does have a point. She does know Ramsay better than anybody there. And she tries to give Jon some really solid advice that Ramsay just likes to play with people. Don't do what he wants you to do. You're going to fall into his trap. That's what he does. He sets traps for people. He's going to think one step ahead of you.
Yeah, and just to kind of offer kind of a counter view to the desire that I think most people had, where they're, you know, screaming at their televisions, tell Jon about the Knights of the Vale, tell him, tell him, tell him. I'm not sure in that moment that it would have changed anything. I feel like Jon was committed to going to war. And I think that his response, had she told him, probably would have been something like, have you heard back? How do we know that we're coming?
Well, yeah, at that point, it's a little bit too late because they've already established it's going to be in the morning. I mean, you can't, after that point, you can't say, well, okay, well, hold off. It's not going to be today. It's going to be tomorrow. Or, no, not in the morning. Can we meet in the afternoon? At that point, yeah, it's too late. But I still think that's information that would be good to have because you can at least try to delay it or something. I don't know. Or at least I think maybe your motivation would be a little bit different, or maybe their tactics would be a little bit different, knowing that these people are on their way.
After we get that Jon and Sansa debate, we get a shot of Tormund and Davos walking through, kind of relating to one another, I guess, talking about the men they followed previously. What did you think of the scene with Tormund and Davos?
This was a dream scene for me because I love the two of them so much. And knowing that I had this lovely chunk of time with my two favorite guys on the show, they didn't really need to say much, and I was all starry-eyed, so it didn't matter. But it was lovely. The writing was really cool. I liked being able to see the perspective from where the two of them came from and how they've come together and they're fighting together, and we got a little insight to Davos's and Tormund's pre-fight rituals. Tormund's not a fan of wine, we find out. He prefers drinking sour goat's milk, which sounds horrible.
Yeah, they really did a good job of underscoring the fact that the wildlings they're new to like the more cultured world of Westeros, even though it's not really all that cultured, I guess.
Yeah.
But you know, I wanted to ask you here, what did you think of the idea in their conversation where Tormund talks about following Mance and Davos talks about following Stannis and how, maybe it wasn't worth it to follow kings. And they kind of have this conversation about the kinds of men that they follow. And yet, through both of their experiences, they have found themselves now following Jon Snow. What did you make of that conversation?
It seems like you're trying to lead me into something.
No, I'm just
And I don't.
I'm literally just asking.
Oh. Um, that before they were following these really great men, and now they're following they're now backing somebody who is a common man, who is basically at their same level. It's somebody that they can maybe relate to more now. I didn't really take anything of it, so I don't know what you're trying to ask of me.
Well, I just found it to be a very interesting conversation because these guys are used to following kings and now they find themselves following Jon. And depending on what Jon's bloodline is, maybe Jon does have king's blood in him somewhere. And that maybe Jon is just a different kind of future king, or maybe he's just a different kind of guy. He's definitely the more reluctant hero that than what we have saw. He's definitely not Stannis. He's not as entitled as Stannis is.
So do you see that as some type of possible foreshadowing? I mean, I know that we are all fairly confident as to what John's lineage is, which would mean that he does have king's blood in him. So the fact that they're saying, well, we followed kings before, but now we're following John and he's not a king, that some kind of, I don't know, foreshadowing into things of the future that, well, no, he really is.
I think it very well could be foreshadowing. I just think it's an interesting reminder that Jon is still thought to be just a bastard.
Yeah.
He's not thought of as a descendant of royalty. I mean, even if lineage aside on Jon's parents, being a Stark kind of means that you have king's blood because they were northern kings for such a long period of time. It's not king's blood by whatever the most current definition would be, but again, it's just kind of an interesting thing that I think was thrown out there. And it kind of lends to Jon's character a little bit. Another bit of foreshadowing that I thought was, I don't know, maybe I'm just jumping at shadows here, but that scene with Sansa and Jon right before this one,
Mm-hmm.
where Jon tells Sansa that he is going to protect her, and Sansa says, "No one can protect me. No one can protect anyone." Maybe it's just hearing the word "no one" so many times during last week's episode. I immediately thought of Arya.
Oh, okay. I didn't make
Like,
that connection, but now that you said that, I kind of like it.
I don't know that it necessarily means anything. Not everything has to mean something, I guess, but it just kind of felt reminiscent. I mean, that was the title of last week's episode.
Yeah, and now it makes it feel like it's poignant, and now I'm kind of upset with myself that I just kind of skimmed over it and I didn't really pay attention to it. So thank you for bringing that to light. I like that.
It jumped out more when I watched it a second time.
Yeah.
What else do we get here? Davos finds out about Shireen, finds the
Yeah.
stag that he had carved for her,
Yep.
just as a Father's Day reminder about the events of last year.
Oh, speaking of too, in when we were in Marine, we had Danny and Yara all talking about how terrible their fathers were. So happy Father's Day.
Yeah, and I mean, still nobody had a worse Father's Day than Tywin Lannister a couple seasons ago, where he found out that
Yes.
his kids were fucking, and he gets murdered by his son.
Taking a
Tywin had the
shit.
worst Father's Day ever.
Yeah.
But yeah, dads did not do well in tonight's episode either.
No.
But Davos doesn't do anything right away. So I
No,
think this is just information he's holding on to, or
I completely believe he's not going to just let that go. There's no way. He needs to remain focused on the battle ahead. That's not something. There's a time and place, and I think he realizes that he's going to hang on to that information But for now, he's going to be focused on the task at hand. And then is this big ass battle that we have.
Yeah, and then speaking of Melisandre, we get that scene of Jon and Melisandre, and this to me played out way different than I thought it would.
And how did you think it was going to go?
So Jon tells Melisandre, if I go down, don't bring me back. If I fall, leave me dead.
Yeah.
But but I love the way Melisandre's like, no, can't do that. I'm gonna
Yeah.
keep bringing you back no
Yep.
matter what you want, because it's
Yep.
not up to you. It's up to the Lord of Light. I just thought it was kind of an interesting way to say no.
Yeah. No,
Like if somebody asks you that, like you're not gonna say, no, I'm not going to listen to you.
well, she was very snippy anyway because, she's like, you weren't at the council meeting, and she's like, well, I'm not a fighter, I'm not going to be there for that. It's like, well, still, do you have any words of advice? Don't lose. Gee, thanks, Mel. That was really helpful.
I know all this fuss that she made last time about not being brought to battle, and like that's the advice that she's gonna throw out there: lose, and I'll resurrect you no matter what you want.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah,
did notice that Melisandre is not wearing her like heavy jacket anymore. She's, I guess,
it's
feeling
true.
okay.
Yeah, but she's still really mopey. But there was something that I thought was really interesting that, when he was questioning, what do you mean you answer to him, to the Lord of Light? How do you know? How does he tell you? And she's like, well, I try to read the signs as best I can. She says, as best I can. I don't have any power, she says. So she is still in this state of questioning herself and questioning her abilities, where before we've always seen her be so confident and sure of what she can do. And now she's still, even after this miraculous event that she did, she's still questioning everything.
It's almost as if there's a missing piece of information about Jon.
Yeah. Wonder if
I
we'll
mean,
get that soon.
factor in that with what we were just talking about with Davos and Tormund, and you get the feeling that there's just a missing piece about Jon that I have a feeling we'll get an explanation to very soon.
I hope so. Like next episode, maybe. That'd be a good time for it. It's been teased this whole season, this whole series. So hopefully, something next week. We will touch on that in our predictions episode that we will have later this week, I'm sure.
So there's that line also where Jon says to Melisandre, "What kind of god would basically screw around this much and leave all these signals and not make his will clear?" And she says, "The one we've got." And I thought to myself, if you think about it, the Lord of Light is really the one doing the work here. The gods of the Seven aren't doing shit. Like they haven't done anything. The Lord of Light and the Children of the Forest, these are the only gods that we've seen that have any kind of actual power.
Yeah, everything else is an old guy saying this is what the other ones want, but it seems like he's working on his own uh, wants and desires and motivations as opposed to speaking through others. Because, yeah, they haven't showcased anything.
So we get to the main event. Morning comes and it's time to rumble.
Yeah. So who's on the burning X's? We
I
don't
have
know.
no idea.
We don't know. Just random people Ramsay decided to kill. At least one of them. The other ones, it doesn't look like there was anybody on them. We only saw one for sure. But yeah, just
Yeah, I thought that
random
was going to be
people.
a thing.
I did too, as it usually is with them. So they just randomly picked somebody, I guess. I don't know.
Apparently it's people that we don't give a shit about.
Yeah. Well,
Because
speaking of,
Rickon is back.
he is. And that's one of my criticisms for the show. Another one of my criticisms right here.
All right, lay it on me.
I wish, in hindsight, that they would have established more of Rickon's character. Because I think it would have made this scene that much more powerful and that much more upsetting that it happened. Rickon is a character that we hardly saw at all. He appears out of nowhere in this season, and then we don't hear. He doesn't even say a word. We haven't heard him say anything. And we don't even get a sense of who he is, or we don't even get a chance to even care about him other than the fact that he has the last name Stark. So I think this scene would have been that much more powerful had we have cared about him.
I think the reason he wasn't given lines is the same reason that Ollie wasn't given lines.
Well, yeah, his
Because
voice is
he's reached
probably
the awkward
broken.
teen years.
Yeah, probably, but you have to make some kind of a sacrifice if it makes this scene, it diminishes the powerfulness of this scene and just the sick mind that Ramsay has on its own. It could have been anybody, and it's a horrible mental game that you're playing, not only with the subject of your game, but then also on the other end, your two subjects of the game that you're playing. Horrible thing, but I think it would have been that much more powerful.
The name of Rickon's direwolf is Shaggy Dog, and Shaggy Dog has a literary meaning as well. A Shaggy Dog story is a story in a work of literature that ultimately goes nowhere.
Yeah.
Rickon's direwolf is named Shaggy Dog, which indicates that Rickon is a Shaggy Dog character. His
Yep.
story doesn't go anywhere. It's not intended to go anywhere. So that in mind, I was okay with the way this went down.
Yeah, agree to disagree, I guess. I mean, even if we had some kind of sense of character or were able to care or feel for him in any way, his story still wouldn't go anywhere, but it would have had a greater end or a greater impact at its end. And I think that was a huge opportunity that was missed.
Okay. So the killing of Rickon,
yeah,
is really Ramsay outsmarting Jon.
completely.
Because this causes Jon to make an enormous tactical mistake.
Yeah.
All we heard in that whole war council was make them charge first, make them charge first. And of course, what does Jon do? He does the most Stark thing you could ever fucking do and decides to run head on at the cavalry.
Well, even Sansa herself said Rickon's already gone. It's only a matter of time before he kills him. He's not going to make it out of this alive. She knew what was going to happen. I mean, not specifically what was going to happen, but she knew that even more so than Jon or Sansa, according to Ramsay, Rickon was going to have to go.
Yeah, she was right. She was resigned to the fact that he was
Yeah.
going to die, and Jon was not. And because Jon wasn't, and I think it's a hopeful thing. It's something that's admirable. It's an admirable quality about Jon, but Jon hasn't watched the show like we have, so he doesn't know. He doesn't know how much of a crazy asshole Ramsay is.
Yeah.
And so, he's still believing that he can save his brother, and when he can't, and it's heroic. It's totally heroic what Jon does, but it's also incredibly stupid. And that's not out of character. I have seen some people that have kind of levied that criticism at Jon's character, where they're like, "Oh, well, Jon was stupid because he charged into battle." Jon made a mistake. Like, you can call it stupid or not. Jon made a mistake in his strategy, and he let his emotion get the best of him.
Yeah.
And that's not out of character for Jon.
Well,
it would only be stupid if it was something that was out of character, and it wasn't out of character. That was Jon doing something you would expect him to do.
Well, and that's where Ramsay excels. He excels at being able to know what your button is. And he's going to push that. He did it with Theon. He took away his plaything. And he did it with Sansa. He took away her purity. And he knows what that button is going to be. And he knows the nobleness of the Starks, and he knew exactly how to get Jon to fall right into his trap.
Yeah.
And
And,
how many people were yelling zigzag, zigzag at their
yeah.
TV? But
Serpentine.
yes. But I mean, I read that as a huge criticism that a lot of people had, and that's actually one that, yes, I was yelling zigzag at my TV as well, but I can let that one go because Rickon is a boy. He's young boy. Goodness knows what has happened to him up until this point, what kind of psychological just fuck with your head stuff Ramsay has done with him until this point, that when you're told to run in a street, you're told to run, you're just going to run and you're not even going to be thinking rationally. He's a young kid. He doesn't know any better, so I can let that one go.
He's a young kid during like a medieval time period. I mean,
Who
let's
most of his child life has been on the run.
I mean, he doesn't have his shit together like Lyanna Mormont
No.
does.
No, of course not. No, cuz it was how long ago that did he have to run away with Asha and everybody out of Winterfell? So he's been on the run. He's basically been a wildling of sorts. So yeah,
Yeah.
I don't fault it for that.
But here's the thing though, and it is not a smart move for Jon to ride straight forward, but at the same time, like, it's so fucking heroic and cool because he just decides to ride right at the cavalry, and it just looks awesome. And it's not a great move. He shouldn't do it, but the fact that he does it is still so cool. Of course, he ends up riding right into the archers.
Well, yeah, that's the thing, is that's where Ramsay was trying to get him, right at that archery line. Right at that point, and he did, and it was very well done. But even before then, how cool did it look to have Jon run back and get up on his horse like Legolas in The Lord of the Rings?
Yeah,
With no CG done. He just swung right up there. It looked really cool.
Kit Harington is badass when it comes to doing these action scenes. And I would be remiss if I failed to mention what happens next, because it might be one of my favorite things to ever happen in the series.
Yeah.
Because as Jon's charging forward, his horse gets hit with arrows. He gets knocked off his horse. He gets up and he sees the cavalry coming at him.
Yeah.
And this to me is one of my favorite fucking things in this episode. The way he takes that belt off and he unsheathes Longclaw. And it's his like Aragorn moment from Return of the King, where
Yep.
Aragorn charges, towards the Black Gate.
Yeah.
This is Jon's moment, and that shot is just so awesome. And by the way, not only is it awesome, it's real. That
Yeah.
shot of the cavalry running towards
Yeah.
Jon is real. They actually ran 40 horses at Kit Harington.
Yeah, full speed, full force. Right at him. Amazing. Amazing. It looks so good, and I definitely went back, and when I watched the episode a second time after I saw the inside the episode with them filming this, I appreciated it that much more. Just beautifully shot. And then from this moment, it's like the calm before the storm, because then all of a sudden all hell breaks loose. Oh my gosh. I have never been so stressed, on the edge of my seat, watching this show as I did within the next couple minutes that follow.
Yeah, and immediately after that clash of everybody coming together, we get this unbelievable single take that lasts, I believe, 58 seconds of just Jon in battle.
Did you time it?
I did.
Did you?
I did. It's about 58 seconds, give or take a second or two. But it's nothing but Jon fighting.
Yeah.
And it's astonishing. It's really great. HBO has done that before. They did it with an awesome scene in True Detective. It's a tracking shot that lasts about 5 minutes. And of course, the ones in Daredevil that you and I have talked about before, that are incredible also. And this one's right up there. It's so well done.
The thing I thought was just really cool is that it's showing us from his perspective, because the camera is right down at his level. So we are seeing it right in the thick of it. It was so intense. So incredibly intense.
Yeah,
Just the
and
different things.
I hate to keep mentioning it, but if you have not seen the HBO Anatomy of a Scene, for this scene you have to watch it because it's just awesome. You would be stunned at how many actual horses are flying around during this scene. It's just, again, it's astonishing. Okay, so after we get that tracking shot, we start to see Ramsay firing arrows
Oh,
into the skirmish.
yeah.
And we also get, by contrast, Davos not firing arrows into the skirmish
Yeah.
because he's afraid that he's going to kill his own guys. Ramsay does not have that fear.
He doesn't care. He wants to take out everybody. It doesn't matter. One of the shots that they show that just for whatever reason, this made me cringe more than Rickon when he was running and Ramsay was firing the arrows, were to see the arrows hit Rickon's body as it was laying there.
Yeah,
That
what a
was gut wrenching.
yeah, a macabre kind, but yet kind of interesting touch.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, also among the chaos of what's going on when we're seeing Jon doing his thing here, I mean, we're introduced to the chaos, like you said, we're getting it from his perspective, and there's just so much going on that you literally feel like Jon could die at any second, but there's also a good amount of luck involved in him not being hit by arrows and things like that, because to survive any battle, it's going to require a little bit of luck also.
Well, yeah, because you're seeing, people coming at him, and just before it looks like they're going to get him, here comes somebody on a horse that completely plows through them. There was somebody else that Jon had grabbed, and there was another guy that came up and ended up skewering the guy in the side. As Jon went to put his hand on the guy to say something, all of a sudden he got an arrow through the face. I mean, it was just one after another, left, right, and sideways. And the thing that was so amazing about this is how on earth do you know who around you is on what side? Because they're all in the mud. Everybody's bloody, covered in mud. They all look the same unless they're holding some kind of sigil. There's hardly any way to tell who is who. And it's just brutal. And it kind of reminded me a little bit of like Saving Private Ryan a little bit on when they're storming the beach and there's all of the chaos that's happening and the way that the shaky cam stuff that was going on, which I'm normally really sensitive to. I get lots of motion sickness, but for whatever reason, watching the episode last night and again today, it didn't bother me, which I was so happy about because I was very nervous that I was
You know,
going to get sick, and I didn't.
I'm glad you brought that up because the shaky cam thing really works here. And I'm the same way that you are. I don't love the idea of the shaky cam, but it was an interesting directorial choice because anytime we're with Jon or we're kind of in the trenches there, we get that handheld camera that gives you maybe a little bit more intimacy into what's going on, but it also it is that kind of shaky cam thing that makes it feel a little bit more chaotic. But then that would be contrasted with the shots of Ramsay calling to the archers
Yeah,
that are just smooth, and it's giving you the contrast between what's going on further down on the field versus what's going on with Ramsay kind of parked up on the hill.
exactly. And wow, the scene once everything starts to quite literally close in on all of the troops and on Jon Snow himself, it made me even start to feel claustrophobic. I mean, just our director, what's his first name? Sapochnik, his last name.
Yes.
Uh, so skilled in building tension, so skilled in making us, by how he is filming it, he's making us feel what Jon is feeling. So skillfully done in how these shots were pulled off.
Right. And we also get Davos, who's feeling ineffective
Yeah.
in the back of the battle. Archers can't do anything. And Davos, who's not much of a fighter, he's leading the charge. He's taken the rest of their cavalry right into battle because they don't have any other options at that point. So
Yep.
they have to ride in and try to do the best they can.
Yep, and they do. They just go head first right on in.
And
And
as they're arriving, the bodies are beginning to pile up into these huge mounds. And I did hear a little bit from Benioff and Weiss when they were talking about what they used from a historical context to inspire what went into the episode. And they talked about um, battles during the Civil War. They talked about the Battle of Agincourt. They talked about the Battle of Cannae. And they basically took a lot of real world chunks from historical battles and work them into this thing. And when you're seeing those bodies start to stack up, I mean, it is gruesome and terrifying, but also visually stunning. Just incredible.
well, when I first watched it, I thought it seemed a little uh fantastical, just kind of strange. But then when you stand back and you think about it, well, no, this isn't just hundreds of people. This is thousands of people. And, especially with all of those arrows blanketing and killing so many people at once, it's terrifying. It's like your brain can't even wrap itself around it that something like that would be possible. But it is, and it has happened, and I think this episode more than anything really showed me and showed, us as the viewing audience how brutal warfare is.
Yeah, I mean, this is a brutal episode of this show, and there's a lot of work that went into it. I mean, there's just such unbelievable stuff in here. And the other thing that I really liked about this too is it's not just two armies running at each other. There's actual strategy and counter strategy involved. Like I was just saying, how Davos sends the rest of the troops in to the melee, and at that point, immediately after, that's when Ramsay sends the Umbers down.
Yeah.
And that's when they start to pull off their flanking maneuver to get everybody surrounded and backed up against a pile of bodies. Once they have everybody trapped like that, we get a great overhead shot. And this is also one of the things that Game of Thrones is really, really good at. And that is giving us a sense of proportion in the battle that's happening. So you can tell about how many Bolton troops they have, and you can tell what the circumstances are. And as they have them surrounded, they're just going in and they're closing ranks and they're picking off guys one by one. This leads to a lot of just crazy stuff. We get Jon about to face off with Small John Umber. That doesn't happen because Jon gets trampled.
Yeah.
And this trampling is really terrifying.
Well, yeah, that's what I was saying is that it made me feel claustrophobic. It was shot and done so well as you are with Jon and the other members of the wildlings and the Mormonts that are in there somewhere, that are just being squished in, that are being closed in upon, and people decide that they're going to start going up over the embankment of the giant mound of bodies, and they just start making a run for it, and anybody who's on that side starts to get trampled on, which Jon does, and we stay with Jon while all of this chaos is happening. Just the tone of the music, the way it starts to slow down, and things are closing in and it's getting darker and he can't breathe. And I don't even think I was breathing while this was happening. I was so stressed out watching this.
Well, you also have the fact that there are people on this pile that are legless and armless, and
Oh
there are
my
people that
gosh.
have their guts pouring out all over them. At a certain point in Jon's perspective, you can't tell what's a person and what's just guts and what's just mud. It all kind of mixes into this, this ever growing black hole that he's in.
Yeah.
as you see kind of, it almost looks like visually where you see the light getting further and further away. It's almost like death.
Yeah.
It's like impending death. And you get this sense that Jon might be resigned to his fate and just willing to let it overtake him again. Kind of that calm coming over him and potentially resigning himself to dying again.
For whatever reason, he fights back. He starts to claw and kick and pull himself out of it. And I thought this was a great parallel, or a great way to describe it. Again, it was in that making of a anatomy of a scene video, where this was almost like a rebirth again for Jon. He comes out gasping for air from this suffocating crowd of people.
Yeah, and Kit Harington, I think, even refers to it as a scene very similar to the Misa episode for Dany, where she's being hoisted up among the people. And there's actually a comparison shot. We actually tweeted it out on our Twitter account at NerdflixChill, where you can see the two images side by side. The circumstances and context are different, but you can't help but notice the visual similarity between the two. You have Dany being uplifted by, her people, reborn as this, mother, Misa, and then you have Jon kind of coming up from this, mound of death, and then he's reborn yet again. And it also speaks to the determination of Jon, which is one of my favorite aspects of his character.
So let me ask a question.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you'll be able to have some kind of insight with your book reader knowledge. I'm hoping, maybe. But can you explain to me or fill me in as to why 1-1 doesn't have any kind of weapon? I'm not talking like a sword or something, but at least like a tree trunk or something to start. Because I could just imagine them when they're being closed in, that he could just be holding this giant club or this huge tree or something, and he could just be plowing through all these people. Why doesn't he have some kind of a weapon? Do they just don't do that as a giant?
I don't know. I know we saw him swinging a tree around like it was a telephone pole last season at Hardhome.
I thought so.
So you would have thought that he would have just not even grab two trees and swing them around like you're dual
Yeah.
wielding.
Yeah.
The Arthur Dane of giants.
What the heck, 1-1? Come on. I mean, later
Yeah.
on, he does end up grabbing one of the Bolton shields, which almost look like him just holding a skateboard, and kind of using that. But I'm like, why didn't you do that sooner? Come on.
Yeah, it would have been a lot harder for the Boltons to do that phalanx move with a
Yeah.
giant swinging a tree trunk at everybody.
Yeah. So that's another little criticism of mine. But anyway, we
No, I
wouldn't
agree
we
with
wouldn't
that
have
one.
gotten this whole scene then. So I understand.
Yeah. But once Jon pops up for air, he's kind of looking and he's kind of surveying the scene. And one of the things that I noticed about Jon is from this moment on, he is a much different character.
Yep.
But as he's surveying everything, we also have Tormund and Small John Umber going at it. And this is just a raw fight between these two guys.
I loved it. I just like Tormund.
It's close quarters. You get the sense though that Small John might have been able to kill him.
I know Tormund had a couple little close calls, and then it looked like Small John was going to get the best of Tormund, but oh no, he went full Mike Tyson on him.
He went full Brienne of Tarth on him.
Yeah, that too. Oh.
Yeah, see? I mean, how much will Brienne love Tormund once she knows that he's a biter?
I love this.
She's a biter too. She took the hound's ear off, man.
That's right.
But the only reason Tormund had a chance was because everybody was distracted by the sound of horns.
Yes.
And King Theoden and the Rohirrim. Oh wait, no. It's different.
Wrong movie.
Sorry.
No, can I tell you that while I was watching this, I've mentioned it before that I watched through a Roku. I watch HBO Go through a Roku streaming, and at that moment, that the horns went off, and Ramsey turns his head to look to see where the horns are coming from, my stream died.
Oh, that's awful.
And I was ready to throw something at my TV, and I yelled out no, because I basically knew what was going to be coming, but still at that moment to have the stream died. And apparently there was something that happened with HBO, because they ended up tweeting about it later, that their whole thing died for anybody that was streaming. It was horrible, but it came on just a few, what seemed like forever, moments later. But yes.
And yeah, and so in comes Littlefinger with the Knights of the Vale, and maybe it was predictable. That's fine. I actually thought the execution of it was terrific. We talked about how the Double D's took stuff from like the Battle of Cannae and the Battle of Agincourt and the Civil War and that kind of stuff, but they also borrowed cinematically as well, like you were talking about from Braveheart. They borrowed from, clearly here, from Lord of the Rings too, and they borrowed from 300, and they borrowed some of the different greatest hits of like cinematic battles. But even though you knew it was coming, it still looks tremendous. I mean, you've got, the Knight of the Vale that's riding in with the flag, and he's got this like ready to go face. It just looks wonderful.
I thought there were a lot of things in this episode that were incredibly predictable. They played out just exactly as we thought that they would. And some people may say that's a bit too much fan service. They didn't throw enough curveballs, or we weren't surprised by anything. However, I found a lot of these things still to be incredibly satisfying. The way that they were executed was so skillfully and wonderfully done. I can't it's almost like it cancels each other out. I can't fault it because of it.
The overhead shot of the Knights of the Vale breaking the Bolton lines.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Really, really cool. And just as Littlefinger and Sansa are up on the hill, Littlefinger's got this smirk on his face. And Sansa's kind of watching everything happen, and she sees Jon and Tormund and 1-1 kind of break away from the group.
Oh man, once we do get that breaking of the Bolton lines and we see Jon and Tormund kind of emerge up the hill.
Yeah.
The look on Jon's face is one of my favorite parts of this episode, because Jon has now gone into complete psycho mode. This is Jon Voorhees here.
This is what I wanted.
Jon is like a maniac.
This is what I was talking about. That I needed to see. I needed to see this from him. He's been through so much. There needed to be something happen to get him to break, and he did. And this is what I was waiting for. This is exactly what I was talking about. And even the look on Ramsay's face when he realizes, I'm fucked. I need to get out of here. And he does, and he just turns and walks away, or trots away. I thought it was really interesting once he makes it back to Winterfell, and Ramsay says to, it looks like his commander, and he says, their troops are gone. And the guy's like, our troops are gone. Like, we've depleted everything. And he's like, it doesn't matter. We have Winterfell. We'll just wait. And he didn't have to wait for very long.
So when Ramsay retreats inside the walls of Winterfell, the actor who plays Ramsay, whose name I will butcher if I try to pronounce, he had talked about comparing it to like Hitler's last days in his bunker.
Yeah.
Because there's this kind of sense of denial that takes place. It's like, well, we still have the castle, even though we've lost on the battlefield. And that's kind of what we see here. One of my criticisms comes as soon as we get into the gates of Winterfell, when 1-1 breaks through and he falls to his knees, and you can tell that he's about to die.
Yeah.
And then we get the arrow shot through the eye from Ramsay.
Yeah.
One last fuck you to the audience.
Yep.
This to me is a little bit confusing. I'm not sure why he didn't just shoot Jon there. Jon's not even paying attention to Ramsay at that point. He's looking directly at 1-1 for what feels like 30 seconds.
That's a really good point, but I think at this point, Ramsay, I think it's all about his pride, and him always wanting to fuck with other people. More so than wanting to kill Jon Snow, it's like he wants to fuck with him first.
Or he just wants to kill a giant to say he
Or
did.
or that. But no, I think that he just wants to be an asshole. He just wants to fuck with your mind, and that's what he has so much pride and so much confidence that he thinks that he's going to be able to screw with him before he then is going to take him out.
And Jon has decided, I'm not even going to use Longclaw for this.
No, not at all.
But did you like the little nod that happens here? Did you see the shield that he picks up?
Yeah, it was one of the Mormont shields.
Yeah, so he drops Longclaw, which is the ancestral sword from House Mormont.
That's true.
Immediately picks up a shield from House Mormont, so he's still got the Bear Island protection going on.
Yeah.
Not to mention the fact that, the lady of House Mormont is Lyanna. And, of course, we have the theory about the R plus L equals J for Jon's potential mother. So we have kind of a neat little nod to the idea that the bear is still looking out for him, but Jon he's like in full serial killer mode. Like, this is horror movie Jon.
Do you know what it reminded me of once he starts going fully onto Ramsay? It didn't remind me of a horror movie. Do you know what immediately came to mind?
What's that?
I tweeted about it earlier, and I don't know if I'm guessing you didn't see what I did. It reminded me of the scene from A Christmas Story.
Oh, yeah.
Where Ralphie is going on the bully, and he just starts spewing all this stuff while he's sitting on top of the bully, just beating the shit out of him. That's exactly what this reminded me of.
Treated Ramsay like it was Scott Farkas.
That's right. He had yellow eyes.
But I mean, Jon kind of taking those steps towards him, Ramsay fires 3 arrows right into the shield, and Jon just levels him, and he starts beating the ever-loving shit out of him. And this is one of the things I love about the show, because I abhor violence. Like, I don't have any violence or desire to be violent anywhere in my life. But yet, when Jon is on top of this guy, punching him in the face, I cannot get enough, and I want more. And that's what the show forces you to do as a viewer. You call your own morality into question here. You're like, Jesus, what am I doing? I want him to punch the guy's head off.
If you want more, I highly suggest, and I sent this to you earlier, one of the Game of Thrones YouTube reviewers that you and I both really enjoy. And if you, as a listener here, have not checked this guy's stuff out, please do so. But he's Aussie Man. Aussie as in Oz, as in Australia. OZZY. Aussie Man on YouTube did a really cool extended scene of Jon and Ramsay, and it's really funny. This guy's sense of humor kills me. I absolutely love it. So go check that out if you get a chance.
Yeah, that was great. I would also like to get on a loop the shot of Wun punching the horse.
Yes.
We didn't mention that, but Wun punches a horse, and it's friggin' glorious.
Didn't the horse that wasn't the it was just like a body that was on the horse, I think. Like, I don't even.
Yeah, it was a headless horseman.
Yes.
He had no head.
He was
headless horseman knocked out by Wun.
And he was just missing a flaming pumpkin.
But yeah, so Jon is just punching the fuck out of Ramsay, and just when you think he's about to kill him, he sees Sansa.
Yeah.
And I think this is his acknowledgement to her. I think there's a little old Ned Stark happening here.
Yeah.
I think there's a little like, he who passes the sentence should swing the sword. He's giving this kill to Sansa.
That's, yes, because she even said the night before, you are going to die tomorrow. So she has passed the sentence, and he lets her do that. At first, though, when I saw it, I took it as when he saw her it snapped him out of it because it was almost like he didn't want her to see him like that. That wasn't him, that he was, just full on raged out, and it was like, oh my gosh, what has happened to me? And that snapped him back and made him quit. But after the next scene that we get, that's when I realized, like, okay, maybe he stopped so he could let her have her piece.
Do you know how good it felt to watch those Bolton banners come down and to watch those Stark banners to go back up again?
I knew when that was happening. I knew when that was happening that you had to have been cheering or something. And I wish I could have been there to see that.
It's kind of understated in a way. Like there's no music that accompanies it. It just kind of happens.
Yeah.
With very little like fanfare, because I think they're trying to kind of be respectful to the cost of war in this whole show. And I just thought it was just a wonderful moment. I mean, there was no music that accompanied it, but I will say, just kind of, and we can always talk about this in a second, but the music for this episode was phenomenal. It was new. It was music we hadn't heard before. It was just great. Anyway, I'll come back to that in a second, because we do finally get what everybody had been waiting for: the death of Ramsay Bolton.
Yeah. Yeah. And I gotta say, for a moment there, I thought it was Ghost that was gonna come through there.
So did I. That was my prediction.
I know. And I will say, okay, so my prediction, I did predict that Jon Snow was going to, but I said I think it's going to be Jon, but I really want it to be Sansa. And in a way it kind of was. So I I'm not taking it fully, but I feel satisfied completely.
And I love the dialogue between Ramsay and Sansa here in this end scene, where she talks about how his name will disappear. His
Yeah.
family name will disappear.
Yeah.
It'll all disappear. And I thought that was great, because that's it for the Boltons. Boltons are done.
So
The
what
way
did
that the Baratheons were done last year, the Boltons are
Yeah,
now done this year.
that's true. So what did you take? I'm going to turn your tactic around onto yourself.
Okay.
What did you take from the line that Ramsay says, "I'm a part of you now"? What did you take? Did you take anything from that?
Uh, I think that he's saying that I'm always going to be in your head.
Mm,
It's part of his mind game.
yeah.
He thinks that he's impacted her. He thinks that he has destroyed her. And that's part of his arrogance. It's also part of his strategy, too. Do I think that's necessarily true? Maybe. But none of these characters are the same. They're all kind of carrying with them their own torment and heartbreak. And so I just thought it was his way of saying to her, I've gotten in your head and I'm always going to be there no matter what.
Yeah. Which is very curious and is interesting because this whole scene of what's taking place is something that we have seen him do. So now we see Sansa giving him a taste of his own medicine, and then her, instead of her just walking away from it, she kind of starts to leave, and she starts to leave the frame, but then you see her come back and she's watching it. And then she finally turns and walks away, and you see the ever so slightest smile on her face. So
Yeah,
I think he's left his mark a little bit more than he realizes.
maybe. Maybe. And this could be the emergence of the kind of Sansa Lady Stoneheart type character, because this is a pure vengeance move on her part.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe. Oh my gosh, did you just resurrect my Lady Stoneheart hopefulness again?
Maybe.
Maybe.
I'm in the dark as to what happens next. I mean, I'm really not sure. I could see it going that way.
I
I actually
heard
thought the dog that bit Ramsay's face was kind of cute.
I thought he was just gonna lick his face. Like it just like he
He
was
looked
gonna just start licking him.
he looked very friendly.
I didn't think he looked. Yeah, he didn't look very aggressive.
And also, just one more thing about
Sure.
that shot when Sansa is watching.
Yeah.
It is interesting because it is one of those half light, half dark shots on the
Mm-hmm.
character's face. We saw one of Jaime last week where you have half of their face completely in shadow and you have the other half kind of basked in light, and it always kind of represents the duality of a certain character. And we do get that shot of her through those gates of the kennel.
Yeah, good point. Good pickup on that. I know that I saw some people uh, mention on Twitter last night and this morning regarding that line where he says, I'm part of you now. And I think it just reignited all of those Sansa pregnancy rumors. Because some people were thinking early on in some of the shots that they thought Sansa looked like she was pregnant, but it was really just kind of the way her dress was draped, where it made her stomach area look big and it not big at all, actually. Body shamers people, but this line I think kind of it reignited that because some people are thinking, oh, I'm part of you now because she's pregnant with his child. But I don't think people understand the amount of time that has passed between when she left Winterfell the last time to now, that is not possible for her to be, she is
Yeah.
not pregnant. So,
Not to mention, she jumped off a building, for God's sakes.
well, that's true.
I feel like that would be kind of a high risk move
Yeah.
for a pregnant person to jump off of the walls of Winterfell. But I think that's kind of a foolish notion. I've never bought into that whole pregnancy idea. I think it's a little bit ridiculous. I think it would be cheap and soap opera style. I would not be into that at all. I
Yeah.
don't think that's the case, and I've never even entertained it as a realistic idea.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. So, what are your final thoughts on this episode?
Well, one thing that we didn't get to talk about, but I noticed it, and I'm sure you noticed it too because you do the same thing that I do with these things, is the music for this episode. The Ramin Djiwadi score
Yeah.
for this episode is incredible. I mean, I was expecting to hear kind of the Bolton theme contrasted with the Stark theme and kind of keep those themes relatively traditional, but that did not happen here at all. There's a whole new theme for this battle. There are variations of some of those classic musical themes for the Starks in particular, but this was new and it was epic.
There were, now I didn't pick up on this, and this is me catching something from Twitter as well, that somebody said that they heard little bits of Stannis's theme throughout this a little bit when Davos was picking up when he discovered the stag. They said there's a little bit of Stannis's theme that kind of plays very quietly in the background, and I didn't
Yeah,
catch that.
I think it's the overall Baratheon theme.
Yeah,
Yeah, that I did notice.
yeah. Just now, what's the theme that's playing? Is it the Stark theme that's playing when Jon is kind of getting trampled on, and it starts to kind of slow down? Because that sounded familiar to me.
It is, but it's kind of a modified version of it that we had never
Yeah,
heard before. A lot of the music in that we hear here um, is a modification, but it's kind of done in this new way. Even the stuff in Marine, where we hear Danny's
yeah.
theme, that Mother of Dragons theme that we've heard over and over again, it feels like it's become more epic. And I think that underscores what's happened to those characters here too, because I feel like in this episode we have had the Battle of Fire and the Battle of Ice, and we now have Danny and Jon elevated as the two primary heroes of this series. And the music is now reflecting where they're at in their arc.
I have so many things that I want to say, but I want to save them for our predictions episode for episode 10.
Okay.
So I don't necessarily want to go any further beyond this. But yeah, there's some things that I want to touch on, but I'm going to bite my tongue.
You're calculating ahead? You're calculating the
Yes.
roadmap ahead? So have I.
Yes.
So have I. I've done the same thing. And it puts us in a very interesting predicament going into season 7, I think. But yeah, you're right. We can talk about that on whatever day we record our
Yes.
predictions and preview.
Soon. Soon.
What about you? Any final thoughts on the episode?
Final thoughts. I think this episode was both beautiful and horrific. It was shot fantastically. Again, very cinematic, feel even better than a lot of things we have seen in the cinema as of late. On the small screen, on television, we are getting this quality. Amazing. I think there are some things in the plot that were a little lacking, but nothing as so much that would make me think that it would overshadow this amazing choreographed and executed battle that we received. So there,
Yeah,
like I said, the little it's minor things, but not enough to make me think that it diminished the overall episode at all.
and I think this episode is an achievement. I
Yeah.
mean, Miguel Sapochnik has now entered another level. And I think this episode of Game of Thrones has, I said it before, it's a game changer.
Yeah.
Because I think that the fact that they were able to not only create it and execute it, but do it so successfully is going to send reverberations throughout the industry. I really believe that about this episode because when I compare this to those other battles that we've talked about, some of the ones that influenced this one, even the ones in Saving Private Ryan, even the ones in Lord of the Rings or 300 or any of those big epic battles that we've ever seen, having watched so many of them, did you even think that you would possibly see something so new and so unique?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were, as we mentioned before, there were a lot of things in this battle or in this episode that were um, predictable. Of course, we knew Jon was going to win. I think we all knew that he was going to be able to overtake Winterfell, that Ramsay was going to die, that, there were a lot of things that the Knights of the Vale were going to come to their aid. There were a lot of things that we thought were going to happen. But within all of that, there were a lot of things I hadn't seen before. That like that tracking shot with Jon. I know that you said that it was kind of similar to um, True Detective, which I haven't seen that shot, which I know you've been telling me I need to watch that show. I need to watch that show. I'll add it to my list. But there were a lot of effects. There were a lot of stunts that happened with this that I hadn't seen before that were just really cool. And much like I think that Daredevil really changed TV as far as fight choreography. The fight choreography and the lighting on Daredevil, I'm stepping away from Game of Thrones for a second here to gush about this. I think are some of the best quality that I have ever seen. Even better than a lot of stuff that I see in the movies. I think this episode did equally just the same. Again, just saying as how you did that it was a game changer.
In talking about that fight choreography, one of the things that I think made this stand out, kind of talking about how you talk about the fight choreography in Daredevil, I think one of the things that separates this a little bit from that is that in Daredevil you didn't have animals involved.
That's
I mean,
true.
again, not to get back to this thing with the anatomy of a scene video that's out there, but they show how many horses are like running at Kit Harington. And they had like one horse wrangler for everybody, and she's like 28 years old, and she's responsible for Kit Harington not getting trampled, basically.
Yeah.
But and that's the thing that I love about this kind of filmmaking. It's the thing I love about Sapochnik as a director. I mean, they're down in there doing this stuff. I mean, I love the shot of Jon. It's kind of reminiscent of the Hard Home shot where he cuts the white in half last season,
Mm-hmm.
where he kind of has a tracking shot then that does the same thing. In this one, he knocks a guy off of his horse, and the guy just goes flying off the horse. And you would think that that shot is CGI all the way.
Yeah.
It isn't. It's real. There's a real guy on horseback. He gets hit by Jon and goes flying off the horse. He's attached to, cables, and he just goes flying off. And that is a real thing that they executed. And that to me is the difference. That to me is the difference. That's the difference between making something great and then just doing the run of the mill.
Well, there's a trend now, and I hate to say that there's a trend, but things are going back to having practical effects. For so long, it seemed like it was the trend, quote unquote, of having so much CG. And you would see this in movies and a little bit in TV as well, where there was so much CG that was happening and things were there's something that happens in animation when you're doing scenes like this where the human eye can tell that it's just not quite right. It is the speed at which it moves, it is the gravity of it, when things will start to kind of look rubbery. And it takes a lot of skill to be able to pull that off from an animator, and not many can do that. Um, and things have kind of started to turn back to doing more practical type effects. Civil War, Captain America Civil War did a lot of practical effects. So they actually crashed, a huge truck instead of having it be completely CG. Like they are doing these actual stunts, these actual um, things, and adding in CG just kind of to pepper it, to season it a little, instead of relying completely on CG effects. And in my line of work with what I do, that makes me very happy.
Yeah, it's almost like the Force Awakens. It's kind of like the Star Wars effect, where they committed so hard on reestablishing the
Yeah.
visual aesthetic by going to more practical effects, that you almost feel like now that they're showing that they can make something that is critically successful with audiences, financially successful, that it might be kind of a renaissance of practical effects. Hopefully that's the case.
I hope so. It makes me so happy. And I think another really good comparison too is when you had the Star Wars prequels, and at the same time Lord of the Rings was coming out. And just to see the complete differences between the look and feel of those movies, where you had the prequels that were basically all CG except for your main actors, and
Right.
then Lord of the Rings, where even some of the landscapes, even though they weren't real, they made them where they called them bigatures instead of miniatures because they were so big. They would almost take up an entire room themselves, of making like Orthanc and the different towers and whatnot, that they would use a small like lipstick type camera to shoot this, where it was in scale with uh, those bigatures. Um, these practical things that were done, and I think that made all the, well, directing to aside, it made the difference in the feel of these movies, where you had the prequels, to me seemed very soulless and empty, and then you had Lord of the Rings that just were very rich in feeling, and you can, just by looking at it visually, you can tell all of the care that went into it, and you can see that in this episode of I almost said this episode of Lord of the Rings. God, that would be amazing. In this episode of Game of Thrones, just the care and detail that went into everything, and it felt real because so much of it really was. And I was so stressed out. I needed time to decompress after watching that episode. It's like I couldn't even talk about it. My mind couldn't even wrap itself around what it just saw.
Yeah, we might have to do an entire episode one day on just practical effects and Stan Winston and
Oh, I would love that
some
so
of his
much.
work.
I would love that so
But
much.
yeah, I think overall, I think there were some small nitpicks, but I think you and I are in agreement in that this is an incredible um, television achievement.
I agree, and it has been submitted for Emmy consideration. So I know Hard Home took home quite a few Emmys last year, so I'm hoping this one is recognized just as much.
So now you guys know what we think, and we want to hear what you think as well. So hit us up on Twitter at NerdFlixChill and on Facebook under the same name. Let us know your thoughts on this week's episode, The Battle of the Bastards. Let us know where this ranks among the other episode 9s that we've had for this series. I actually had this one ranked first among the 6. Have you ranked it personally or not?
I haven't even thought about it. But it's towards the top, I will say.
Yeah, my ranking may change depending on how I feel a week from now, but who knows? But anyway, hit us up on Twitter and Facebook. We would love to hear from you guys. As always, everybody, thank you for listening. We appreciate